Now that we activated bundling, it's time to configure Babel to transpile or super modern code back to ES5 code. And this is still important right now, even many years after the new ES6 standard has been introduced. And the reason for that is simply that there are still many people out there who are stuck on like a Windows XP or Windows 7 computer and who cannot upgrade their old Internet Explorers. But we want our applications to work for everyone, and so we need to keep everyone in mind. Now the good news is that Parcel actually automatically uses Babel to transpile our code. And we can configure Babel a lot if we want to, for example defining exactly what browsers should be supported. But as always, that's a ton of work, and so we don't want that, and instead Parcel makes some very good default decisions for us, and so we will simply mainly just go with these defaults. Now just so you get a very broad and very general overview of how Babel works, let's just take a look at their website. So that's babeljs.io, and then here in the documentation, let's take a look here at plugins. Okay, so basically Babel works with plugins and presets that can both be configured. Now a plugin is basically a specific JavaScript feature that we want to transpile, so to convert. So for example, let's say we only wanted to convert arrow functions back to ES5, but leave everything else in ES6. For example, const and var declarations. Now, usually that doesn't make a lot of sense because basically we will want to transpile everything at the same time. And so usually instead of using single plugins for each of these features, Babel actually uses presets. And so a preset is basically a bunch of plugins bundled together. And by default, Parcel is going to use this preset env preset here. And this preset will automatically select which JavaScript features should be compiled based on browser support. And again, that will all happen automatically, and out of the box, Babel will convert all features, so only browsers that are barely used anymore with a market share of less than 0.25% are not going to be supported by the transpiling with this preset here. So that's just a very brief overview, and we will come back here in a second. But for now, let's start or npm run start script again, just so we can take a look again at our final output. So the one we have right now, or we had before, was the compressed one, which was not really helpful. And so now the script is at this one, so F30. So this one, and we can see right away that ES6 is no longer there. So here we have var instead of const that we had before. Let's see if we have something else. So here we used to have a template literal, I believe. And this was now converted to, again, regular ES5 code by using this concat method. So everything that we used from ES6 is now gone. But now let me show you something important. So let's write some code here, which is basically not part of this preset here, because this preset env does actually only include final features. So features that are already part of the language after passing the 4 stages of the ECMA process. However, previously we used class fields, which at the time of recording are only at stage 3. And so let me show you how we could transpile class fields as well. So let's just write a simple example here. And so here I'm going to use a field called greeting, which I'm going to set to hey, and then just a normal constructor which takes a name, this.name equals the name. And then as the constructor is run, it will simply log to the console this.greeting and then the name. So like, hey, Jonas. So const Jonas is a new person, Jonas. But now let's see what happens here. And we should get some kind of error. So let's see. Oh, and apparently it does work now. When I last tested it, it didn't work. So let's make this private. Maybe then we get the error I was expecting. But actually no, everything is working great. Let me just search our code here for person. And so here you can see that the person class has nicely been converted to ES5. So the class keyword is nowhere to be found anymore. And then our entire code that we had here was basically converted to this. All right. And so therefore, there is actually no more need for what I was going to show you, which we had to do before, which was to include this plugin here for the class properties. Because this is still an experimental feature. And so, yeah, we had to manually include this plugin here in order to make this code work. But now that's no longer necessary. And so that makes this even more amazing. But let's try another experimental one. For example, this nullish coalescing operator, which is still also a bit more on the experimental side. So let's say Jonas or null, let's say. And so that actually works as well. Okay, great. Now, there's still two more things that I need to show you here still. And so let's write some more code here. So what I will do now is to use the ES6 find method to find products in a cart that are added more than twice. So that's, I believe, just cart. So cart dot find, because remember, this is an ES6 method. And then return dot quantity where it's greater or equal to. And so that is only the pizza here. So you see, well, maybe this isn't a cart. Let's see what's happening. Oh, but never mind. This is not filter, it is just find. So it will simply find the first element, right? And so this is the first element where the quantity is greater to. But anyway, what I want to show you here is that, well, let me show it to you actually first. So to find this code here in this other script, I will copy this part and then put it here. And so you see that here is basically that same code. So the arrow function that we had is gone, and it was replaced by this regular function. However, the ES6 method find is still here. So it has not been converted to ES5. And the same is true for other things. For example, let's try promises. So promise dot resolve. So we're creating an immediately resolved promise. To make this really a quick example, then let's just log X to the console. And so that works, but it works because our browser understands ES6. Because if we take a look here now, then promise is also not converted to ES5. So remember, promise is an ES6 feature, but again, it was not converted back to ES5. And the reason for that is that Babel can actually only transpile ES6 syntax. So that's things like arrow functions, classes, const, or the spread operator. So these are basically things that have an equivalent way of writing them in ES5. So for example, the arrow function, it is simply a different syntax. And so Babel can simply write function instead of that. And the same goes with const. So it's very easy to simply convert that to var. But the same is not true for real new features that were added to the language, like find and promise. So these new additions to the language, so these new features, they can simply not be transpiled. It's simply not possible. Only syntax is easy to convert, so easy to compile. However, all hope is not lost. So for these added features, again, such as promises or all the array methods like find, and really a bunch of other stuff, we can polyfill them. And so that's why, since the beginning, I've always been saying transpiling and polyfilling. So these new features, we have to polyfill them. Now, Babel used to do polyfilling out of the box some time ago, but recently they started to simply recommending another library. And so we now have to manually import that as well. So import core.js. So that's the name of the library. And then we usually only want to import a part of that library. And that's called stable. And so we can write this. Okay. Now, usually we have to install all of the packages first, but fortunately Parcel is smart enough to install this automatically. Well, at least that is how it should be. So maybe that doesn't work after all. So let's manually install it, but that's weird. So core.js. So let's see. And so here we go. So let's resave it. And so here we go. Okay. So you should probably also try to install core.js manually, and then you will be able to use it like this. So maybe you're starting to see that these things really change all the time. And so I am even confused myself sometimes on why certain things used to work and now they work differently. But the good thing is that you don't really have to understand all this. So this is really more like a recipe that you just need to follow. And then with time, it will all become like a routine and it will become simple. But anyway, let's go back to our code. But you will notice that the code we had before is actually still there. So it's still the same, and promise and find have not been replaced. And that's because that's simply not the way it's supposed to work. So instead, what polyfilling does is to basically recreate the find function and make it available in this bundle so that the code can then use it. So let's search for array.prototype, which remember is where all the array methods are put. So array.prototype.find, and so, well, here it is. So Babel then uses this weird create method, but what matters here is that this will basically implement array prototype find. And the same for find index, every, sum, filter, map, and also for each. Even though these last ones here are not ES6, but for some reason they're still polyfilled here. All right, and the same for promise, probably. Well, not probably, for sure. Otherwise, this is not going to work. And it's not easy to find it, but, well, here is the definition of promise, which is going to be global promise. But I'm not going to dig even deeper into this. That's just not really necessary. However, as you just saw before, the polyfilling is going to polyfill everything, even if we don't need it. So we had the find index method there as well. Let's actually go back there. So array.prototype.find. So it also created find index and every and sum. And so we are actually not even using these. And so if we wanted, we could cherry pick basically just the features that we actually want to polyfill. Now that, of course, is a lot of work, but it will also greatly reduce the bundle size. And so it might be worth it if that's really a concern. So we could, instead of this, So instead of basically importing everything there is, we can just say core.js stable and then only array and then find like this. And so now if we go back here, then, well, then only this one should be here. And yeah, it looks different now. And so probably only this one was not polyfilled. And the same you could do for promise, like this. Okay, so that's going to be a lot of work, which we usually don't do, but it is possible, again, if you are really worried about your bundle size. Finally, just to finish, there is still one feature that is not polyfilled by this one here. And so we always need to install just one more package, which is called npm install regenerator runtime. So regenerator, that's correct. So let's see. Let's already include it here. So we need import, so regenerator runtime, and then slash runtime like this. All right. So this here is for polyfilling async functions. So again, it probably looks a bit confusing that we have to do all of this, but yeah, don't worry. It's just a recipe that you have to follow. Okay. And usually you would put these imports here right at the top of your file. But in this case, we can just leave them here because they will be hoisted anyway, right? Also keep in mind that all of this might change. And so if you're watching this video like in 2 years from now, then things might be different and things might not work the same. And so once again, make sure that you then install exactly the same versions as I have here, especially this core.js and regenerator runtime. And of course, also parcel. So just as I told you in the last video. Okay, and with this, we're actually done with this video and also with learning about modern JavaScript development. So basically with learning about tooling such as Parcel and Babel, and also about modules. Now in the remainder of this section, so the next 2 videos, we will just quickly also talk about modern JavaScript coding. So more on the actual programming side of things. And so there we will learn, or actually more review, how to write clean and modern JavaScript code.